All right. Tis what it is. Guess we're up and running. Theoretically, possibly, maybe. C'est la vie. Today has been a very ADD day. I've been sort of all over the place. So I haven't really been able to sit down and focus on a given thing. But I am trying to pull up and I'm debating with one of my stories. The Crow version. I'm debating as to whether I want to dig up the old fan fiction and start from some of those points, or if I want to do sort of like we did with these short stories this year, where I reimagine them based off of what I remember. So instead of necessarily digging up the old stuff that I wrote for the Crow fan fiction, I'm trying to figure out if it makes more sense just to start with my vague memories, because sometimes that really is the better way to go. Like, I think in past experiences in doing National Novel Writing Month, one of the things that has come to my attention is when you're pumping out the story, it's not going to be pretty. There are going to be times you go back and go, what was I trying to say with that sentence? Like, that isn't a coherent thought. But with the greater context of the rest of the paragraph or the events going on in the story, you can kind of go, well, it seems to be talking about this. And this is what its effect on the rest of the statements are. So you're going to have to rewrite it anyway. And that rewriting is going to change enough things that make them distinctly different enough that I feel like, yes, I had a good idea with what I was writing before, but I'm hesitant to dig up because I'm hesitant to allow myself to be influenced what I wrote in the past. So having written something in the past before as a start to a story and then looking at it now and going like, all right, we're going to rewrite this in a whole different way. I feel like dipping back into the old stuff might contaminate it. But I do remember enough that, like, I remember the main character, the instances of what she went through, the attempt to sort of get back at that, the sort of raid on a powerful person's compound to get to them. And that's all kind of redoable. I could come up with that same kind of concept, but there are pieces in there that I don't fully recall well enough to use again. And one of them was an aspect of a character who is sort of like a bodyguard / assistant to the villains. But she is clearly somebody who has also been kidnapped and brainwashed to serve in that role. And so, in a certain sense, there's an aspect of it that was rescuing her from a role that she doesn't feel she needs to be rescued from. I don't know. It's like, I think that was important enough that I kind of want to dig that back up and take a closer look at it again. But I'm worried that, well, I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen if I get a grazing glance of my previous fiction? Worst is that, I kind of recreate that same stuff and just I'll have to rewrite it anyway at another point. But I don't know. So I guess I'll look it up as I go and do it later this week. I did want to do a little sort of brainstorming on the rest of that by itself anyway. And so I've been sort of bouncing that around in my head earlier today. I believe the word for it is revenant, is what we rework it into. Revenant is a person who has returned, especially supposedly from the dead. I guess there was a movie by that name, so I'm not going to call it that. It's a French word, literally coming back. There was a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, I guess. Okay, so revenant. In folklore, a revenant is an animated corpse that is believed to have revived from the dead to haunt the living. The returning is the word revenant is derived from the Old French word revenant, the returning, from the verb revenir, meaning to come back. Okay, so revenants are part of the legend of various cultures, including Old Irish, Celtic, and Norse mythology. And the stories of supposed revenant visitations were documented by English historians in the Middle Ages. The term revenant has been used interchangeably with vampire, ghosts, and potentially some others. While some maintain the vampire derived from Eastern European folklore and revenants derived from Western European folklore, many assert that revenant is a generic term for the undead. So the from the root, revenant is the being, the noun for one who has returned or returning. But the verb is revenir, meaning to come back. So revenir. I'm curious what happens if we pop those into Google Translate, if they work at all. Okay, so no. We are going to do French. French. There we go. French to English. Coming back. No, that's not. All right. No, oh, come on. Don't be a dork. French. Revenant. Come on. I don't know why they always pick fights with me when I'm trying to do this on camera. Revenant. Revenant seems to be used, at least in this sense, for synonym for ghost, specter, spirit, essence or genie, and apparition. Revenant day is to come back from. Ooh. De. So revenant and then de is. All right. So that's coming back from. And I wonder if I could do a little bit of wordplay with that, where it's not just a revenant coming back, but play a little bit with the sense that revenant day, de, would be coming back from. And play with that sense of the meaning of coming back is much more than just being that undead creature. The concept being more of a, do you come back from the horrors that were done? Can you come back from that? Or is something irrevocably lost? And I also can see the concept of doing a little bit of changing that DE into a DAY. So Revenant Day. I wonder if I could also find a name similar to that. All right, so we could dig up some. That's talking about coming back from the dead. Digging up might be an interesting phrase. Names for Cross Day. DEA. What does it mean, you? What good are you as a service talking about a name if you can't tell me what it means? It might be dia. Yeah, dia is actually a Latin word. It is pronounced dea. It is a title used to indicate one as a goddess, as in Dia, which would be pronounced Dea Dia. I'm doing it backwards. Okay, so that's more that's sort of like where the term deity would come from, I guess. So Dia. Or I guess Dea. How are they pronouncing it? Pronounced Dia, not Dia. Dea is what they're using there. So there's a distinctive syllable break between the DA. I guess you could also do like a DD and just like D for short. Yeah, I asked you for the definition of the words. That's super not useful. Okay, so D might be a short for Dolores or any other old-fashioned name starts with a D. It is not a name, it is an abbreviation. If you add "an" to it, it becomes Deanne. Yeah, wow, that's... Thanks for the obvious. So I guess it's just Dolores, Delta, Dina. Revenant D. Revenant Day. Dera. Diva. All right, so I'll have to think about that a little bit more, but not the most elucidating website for names at that point. And that's one of the things I do struggle a lot with mostly when writing is coming up with decent names for characters. Baby names starting with D. Are they not in alphabetical order? Is there a reason you would not put them in? They are not in alphabetical order. Why would you do that? Who would build 100 name list and not put them in alphabetical order? That is the least useful way to do that. Pop-up ads, seriously. All right. Nope. Dior. I have never heard of that one before. Of French origin, Dior is related to the surname D''OR, meaning golden. That doesn't do us a lot of good. We'll play with that a little bit more. At another point, perhaps. But revenants. Possible precursor of the revenant legend appeared in Norse mythology, called the Draugr or Aptganger, meaning again walker. Stories involve the Draugr often involve confrontation with the creature. The Draugr resists intruders to its burial mound and is often immune to conventional weapons, which render the destruction of its body a dangerous affair to be undertaken by individual heroes. In the folklore and ghost stories of Eastern Scandinavia, dead child beings are described as revenants animated by restless spirits that could be laid to rest by performing baptism or other religious rites. Caribbean lore has ones that are referred to as succulent, succulent, succulent. Okay, now I gotta look at that up. I gotta look that up. Google Translate, give me that one. See what you say to that. Caribbean. Worrying tea? What? No. Just worrying. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. How's it pronounced? Sucreol. Okay. That's the worrying. I don't know what that's all about. I don't know. That's not a very intimidating term. Yeah, no. That doesn't give me anything new there. So, wow, there just isn't a huge amount of data on them here. They're a little just sort of like it's one of the shortest entries on there. Oh, wait. William wrote that the stories of supposed revenants were a warning to posterity, and so common that, were I to write down all the instances of this kind which I have ascertained to have befallen in our time, the undertaking would be beyond measure laborious and troublesome. So apparently it was very common at a certain point. It looks like it's very common, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of sense of like the instigator, the what makes it happen. Okay. The English abbot of Burton tells the story of two runaway peasants from around 1090 who died suddenly of unknown causes and were buried. But the very same day in which they were interred, they appeared at evening while the sun was still up, carrying on their shoulders the wooden coffins in which they had been buried. The whole following night they walked through the paths and fields of the village, now in the shape of men carrying wooden coffins on their shoulders, now in the likeness of bears or dogs or other animals. They spoke to the other peasants, banging on the walls of their houses and shouting, "Move quickly, move! Get going, come!" The villagers became sick and started dying, but eventually the bodies of the revenants were exhumed, their heads cut off, and their hearts removed, which ended the spread of the sickness. Okay, so that gives us a little something to do. So, yeah, I don't know that that works for what I was doing in the story. See, the problem I face is um, the path I was taking in constructing the story years ago was to have a uh, female lead character who had died by being abducted by and then served as the main course at a cannibal's dinner. I guess is the best way to phrase that. The most short, concise version of that phraseology. So that concept of there wouldn't be anything really left other than the inedible parts. And so those would be the things that were thrown out, disposed of. But where I was partially going with that was a sense of, knowing where your remains are. You oftentimes have a sense of like the vampires are oftentimes fill their coffins with the dirt of the graveyard in which they were buried. Things like that usually have a kind of like, this is holy or safe ground for them. And having a person whose majority of their being was consumed by others who are still living, that sort of sense that in them is a piece of you. And that this is super dark and disturbing. I'm sorry. Last night we talked about, what was it, pigs with baboon arms, and now we're talking about cannibalized young children coming back from the dead to, yeah, it's it's weird that my head's in a dark space, I guess. But this main character comes back. I did have the vague notion at some point if I wanted to do, I don't know if you ever saw the original Brendan Fraser, The Mummy. Not the sequels. Yeah, it is 2020. But Brendan Fraser, the Brendan Fraser Mummy, not the old black and white one. It was basically a reboot of, I think. But the Brendan Fraser Mummy had their villainous mummy Imhotep, which is actually based off an Egyptian architect of the ancient Egyptian pyramid time frame. And Imhotep comes back from the dead as the mummy, and he rebuilds himself by consuming the life essence of people who woke him. And so he drains them, they become hollowed out husks, and he becomes slightly more human every time he drains one of them. And I got this sort of feeling like I could do something similar maybe with the one I was working on, where the idea that they were consumed, in some cases parts of them were consumed while they were still alive and eaten by other people who are still alive, and thus contain some of the essence that they ate from this person. And so being able to get their revenge on these people and claim back the parts of yourself that were consumed was sort of part of the play, part of the story. But I feel like if I remember correctly, when I was writing it, this was, at this point, I think it was decades ago. Maybe not quite 2 decades ago when I was writing it. But the idea of that was hard to make work with some of the other elements. But I think the other part I wanted that to play in the story was the idea that it's potential that somebody else in the story maybe isn't redeemed between the death and the coming back, but maybe wasn't even consciously aware of the consumption. So somebody exists out there that contains a piece of you that is sort of like a key component of your claiming your life back from those who took it from you. But they didn't do it intentionally, or were tricked into doing it, or in some other way were roped into this. It's sort of like having a I think I just saw somebody do a reaction to V for Vendetta, and there was that scene where he's getting his revenge on the people who did things to him. And one of the people he's getting revenge against, he's genuinely kind to. And he does it in a way that isn't violent or hateful, but just the sense of like, this is the consequence of the things that you participated in. This is part of what brought you to where you are now. You have a role in what went wrong for me and others, and things have to be done to you because of that. You have to be ended. But I'm not happy about it. And the person who was, on the receiving end of that revenge was also, basically the line was, is it too late to say or is it meaningless to say I'm sorry? And he says, never. It's not meaningless to say you're sorry. It doesn't change anything, but it has meaning. And so there is a sort of element of that concept that I had in mind when I came up with this idea years ago. It doesn't quite fit the crow mythology, which at this point probably makes the best sense to just not bother trying to shoehorn that in there. But that idea that there is somebody out there who isn't evil, but who is that pin that holds up a corner of that evil. And it's sort of like that dilemma that the character has to confront, with the idea that at a certain point in the story, you have this concept of righteous vengeance against those who wronged another. But there's somebody caught in the middle of it who isn't really somebody who's wronging others, but their place in the middle of it supports and maybe not like works for, but enables the continued wrongness of what was done. And that sort of dilemma of like, is the vengeance that I am seeking worth harming another who does good and right in the world, just because they have a place in the midst of that travesty? Like that sort of dilemma, that struggle, that like the revenge can't just be openly, fully embraced without that question of like, where is the line? At what point is the quest for vengeance more wrong than what was being avenged? And it's sort of classic me to play with those concepts in the middle of a story. So I do feel like that element is something I need to work a little bit with. And it seems like there's a lot of leeway, because the concept of revenants don't seem to have a lot of history. I mean, they have history, but there doesn't seem to be a concrete mythology. There's not like repelled by garlic, vulnerable to the light of day, silver bullets kind of stuff. It's just like, they're the returned dead. That's really all we got. I mean, we do have that little bit from what it was the English abbot, who says the villagers became sick and started to die, but eventually the bodies were exhumed, their heads cut off, and their hearts removed, which ended it. Could we play with that a little bit? It's not enough to take their head off, but their heart's removed. I feel like we could play with that a little bit in the sense that, like, if they don't even have their heart, if their heart was consumed by somebody else, that sort of externalizes that somebody else, externalizes that heart in the form of somebody else. And so that somebody else becomes a linchpin, the thing that keeps them alive. Or keeps them undead, I guess is the phrase. Do you want that to be somebody who becomes a companion, or do you want that to be the main villain? Do you want the main villain to have consumed the heart, and therefore the question of defeating that villain means that then you go on to rest? Or does it make it so that the main character has to protect their most hated enemy from being destroyed, because it also means that they lose their second chance at life? I don't know. That feels like there's something there to play with that I can expand on for going further into the story. I mean, if you were to do a one-shot story, that would be different. I think what I'm actually ending up looking down the barrel of is an idea that can be expanded out to a series. And at a certain point, it becomes a question of, like, yes, you've come back from the dead and you're not wholly human and you're not really fully alive, but you're walking amongst the world again. And chances to do things that you didn't get the chance to do before are before you now. But in order to finish what you came back for, to finish the revenge of what was done to you, you have to kill the one who is the key for your remaining there. But in order to stay and have just a sliver of life again, you have to prevent them from being killed. And it's just this little spot of, like, what's the right course? What do you do? If somebody else kills that person, they've destroyed your heart, and you can no longer remain in the world. I don't know. I think there's something there to it. I'm not sure. It's also kind of dark. But the whole idea of this series is kind of dark. You have this young girl who is awakened from death in the forest by a special needs kid who gave her his jacket to protect her against the cold. And she wakes up. It's been years since she died. And she died, like, just the memories of how you were carved apart and eaten while you were still alive, and then ultimately murdered and then just completely consumed. That's dark. That's pretty messed up. And the sort of hunt for all the parts of yourself to reclaim what was taken from you, and bring about the question of, Was your body and your life what was taken from you? Or was it your chance to see what's all around you? The connections that the character forms when they're back, their, their new friends, their support, the differences they make in the lives of others. Was that what was taken from you? Like, that's why I like this story idea, and I don't want to just leave it behind. Like, I can't really do anything with it as a fan fiction for Crow. It's got too many differences from the base storyline, and it's a owned property by another organization or person who I'm not going to step on their toes by publishing in their own setting. But the concept of a revenant is easy enough to just translate to other formats. I don't know. I feel like I do like the idea of a extending story. You're sort of giving it it's not quite a heist, but it's reclaiming. It's sort of like a scavenger hunt. Like, find the missing pieces of the artifact kind of story. But the artifact was you. And you claim those pieces back from the people who wronged you. I don't know. And I feel like just using that base mechanism of the head removal and the heart removal, there's a little bit of me that's contemplating the idea of, in that idea, could you remove a head and have it grow back, and then have a head and another head? Like, are we regrowing body parts, or are we just being able to reattach them? I feel like you'd have to be able to regrow. Because there's the potential for adding later in the story the concept of, well, you're dealing with human cannibals, and a human come back from the dead. What happens if a cannibal eats part of a revenant? Like, if they cut off one of her hands and they eat it, she won't be able to reattach it. So does she go without a limb? I mean, we're starting her from the ground up where she's lost everything. It's probably just a few guts and a skeleton. Parts of a skeleton. I could almost guarantee you that there are other parts that are just completely missing. Most likely just the spinal column. Because, I mean, a rack of ribs is the bone with the meat on it. Most of the organs will have potentially been edible. Most game animals would be edible. They're just, like, basically, I'd have to do a little research, but I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, you do not want the lower intestine, and you do not want, there's nothing of use in the spinal column. My connection is unstable. Please wait while we try reconnecting. Why is that happening? Why is my internet flicking out? Anyway, I think, like, the skull bones, like, I do think like a butcher will oftentimes have, like, limbs especially will have the bone in, Okay, so I'll be curious to see if there's any data missing when we finish this up. It's about 45 minutes in, but I got a little bit longer to go, I think. But I did notice when I was doing some of the look back on some of my videos that I made before for figuring out what my stories were that I could pick from to work on this time. One of the videos I watched, there are whole sections it just skips and it's missing chunks. And I was like, this makes it almost impossible to understand what I was talking about now. And there's like good material, like you hear my voice as I get excitedly getting into it. Like, oh, this makes me think of, and then it skips what it made me think of, and has me going like, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'm like, oh, there's whole chunks of data missing from that. So I don't know if there'll be any of that happening tonight, but yeah. So like I feel like if you start as bones and intestine, and that's like mostly it, then you regrow the character. I would assume that you can kind of regrow the character over and over again. The question then becomes, if they remove a piece, what happens to the removed piece? Does it crumble to dust? And can one of these cannibal characters eat it? And if they do, does it grant them special abilities? I mean, the basic concept of a flesh-eating creature includes the concept of wights and ghouls, I believe. What is a wight? No, I didn't mean to spell it that way. I'm asking about the monster. Okay, so what is a wight? Wight is a creature or a living sentient being. It's in original usage, the word wight described a living human being, but has also come to be used to describe certain undead. The earliest example of usage in the English is in William Morris's translation of Grettis Saga. Okay, and that's based off of Hogbui or Drog. Draugr is an undead creature from Norse mythology. Again, Walker. So that comes from the same source as discussion of the Revenant. A Draugr is defined as a ghost spirit, especially the dead inhabitant of a cairn. Often the Draugr is regarded not so much as a ghost, but a revenant, reanimated of the deceased inside the burial mound. The Draugr was rendered as Barrow-wight long before Tolkien employed the term in his novel. Drog was acquired the meaning of a pale, ineffectual, and slow-minded person that drags himself along. The word is hypothetically traced to phantom. So it does have some roots. They are animated corpses with corporeal bodies, unlike ghosts, with similar physical abilities as in life. Older literature makes clear distinctions between sea and land versions. It's a corporeal ghost with a tangible body. It needs to suffer a second death by destruction of the enlivened corpse. Superhuman strength, can increase their size at will, and carry the unmistakable stench of decay. That's pretty dark. They are undead figures from North and Icelandic mythology which appear to retain some semblance of intelligence. They exist to guard their treasure, wreak havoc on the living beings, or torment those who wronged them in life. The ability to increase its size also increased its weight, and the body was described as being extremely heavy. They are also noted for the ability to rise from the grave as wisps of smoke and swim through solid rock. Slay their victims through various methods, including crushing them with their enlarged form, devouring their flesh, devouring them whole in their enlarged form, indirectly killing them by driving them mad, and by drinking their blood. Animals feeding near the grave of a drugger might be driven mad by the creature's influence. They may also die from being driven mad. Birds drop dead when they flew over the barrows. Okay, so this has a lot more information, and I feel like it gives us room to potentially split and twist portions of this. So the main character would be the Revenant, the Returned. But we could also do the Draugr white character style, be one of these cannibal humans who absorbs some of that Revenant ability by consuming portions of it. Ooh, the idea of consuming a returned undead creature, it's like, that's so gross. Not that consuming a live person is any better, but it's just like corpse eater. Ooh. That's sort of gross. It's super gross is what it is. It's not sort of gross. But it's definitely horror fuel. So you have this character who's come back trying to balance the idea of a second chance at being in the world and finding connections, things that ground her there, with the concept of avenging herself on those who killed her and claiming pieces of herself back from them. And the question of whether or not ultimately to settle the whole thing, or possibly even deal with the idea of forgiving one who was involved without knowing, and staying among the living in their current form at the risk of leaving a monster still alive, and at the additional risk of others becoming powerful monsters through your being there. It's fertile soil, I think. It's definitely a working environment for storytelling. There are other pieces of that story that need to be woven through there. The special needs kid who finds her, her family, and the encounter with somebody, with other people, brought into the early stages of the trap she was in, and other people whose lives have been destroyed and rebuilt to serve the people who destroyed her. There's a lot of playground there for all sorts of stories to take place. And that's part of the reason why I didn't want to just let this one languish as a half-started fan fiction from decades ago. There's room for more here. Now, I can just write this as a novel, but I do think that potentially translating it over for graphic novel work might be in my future. But I got to write it first before I translate it. All right, so it's 57 minutes in, roughly, right in a row. So I think I'm going to call it for tonight. What's today? Tuesday? So I guess Thursday is my next night on. So I thank you for joining me tonight. Hopefully there are no nightmares tonight. And I will catch you on Thursday. Until then, take care. I guess I'll go with sweet dreams. And hopefully sweet dreams are not made of these, because these last two have not been dream fuel that you want to play with. All right, catch you later. Stay safe.